This is the street in central Tehran where Neda Agha Soltan was shot this summer. Three months later, our cameraman risked arrest to film the place where she died. He looks for a splotch of green paint on the road, a sign of the protest movement that filled these streets in June. To keep her name alive, protesters graffiti the walls, but the authorities keep whitewashing it out. From the beginning, it's been a story the regime could not suppress.
I'm going to show you a clip now. This is disturbing. I want everyone to know that. But, and we have blurred out her face out of respect. But this is possibly the most seen piece of video out of Iran in the world.
A 90-second camera phone video had set off the firestorm.
We cannot confirm the situation nor her name.
That look still challenges me. It's with me all the time. I can't forget it. The blood that gushed out of her mouth and chest, that's always with me.
I mean, seeing it outside of Iran, it's scary. But when you were actually there and you think to yourself, I could be her.
A story that said that she had been a bystander at a protest.
What does that mean? Is there an investigation? What have you learned? What happened to Neda?
Now let's see what happened.
Even months later, the regime was being pressed to explain it.
Regrettable. I'm very sorry that one of our fellow citizens were killed, especially a person who wasn't, I mean, she was, not specially, she was not a person who was not in a protest.
Ultimately, both sides would try to claim Neda as a martyr for their cause. But how this ordinary Tehrani girl became such a threat to the regime has been a story much harder to tell. It turns out that Neda was deeply dissatisfied with life in the Islamic Republic, and toward the end of her life, she was trying to get away. Her sister Hoda wrote to us from Tehran.
She used to say, as we all do and know, that there is a dead, depressing air all over Iran. It's everywhere. It's in people's heart. We are condemned to depression. We are condemned to living without being able to breathe.
The story of Neda's death starts with the June 2009 presidential election. Among Neda's friends, skepticism ran high that they could unseat President Ahmadinejad. But then came the country's first ever televised debates. Over the course of the night, the president was put on the defensive.
He says, "Why do you call me a dictator?" Well, I did not say you are a dictator, but your method definitely leads to dictatorship.
Opposition leader Mir Hossein Mousavi gained massive support, and those who wanted change felt new hope. Among them, Neda's friend, Delbar Tavakoli.
I always thought boycotting the election was like saying no. This time I had a different feeling. I was encouraging everybody to vote, either for Karoubi or Mousavi. It didn't matter. Neda wasn't a Mousavi supporter. It was a voice of protest, not in support of a particular candidate, but everyone's voice of protest.
As a new opposition movement surged around Mousavi, this was no longer the election foreign journalists like Scott Peterson had been let in to cover.
Tens of thousands of people on the streets for their candidate and for both candidates. In fact, it was an extraordinary build-up to the election.
But for the reformists, thoughts of victory gave way to new fears.
Just a few days before the vote, there was a rumor that swept the text messaging system, and that was that Ahmadinejad's people had imported 2 million pens with disappearing ink. And of course, the point was that all of these people who would turn out to vote for Mousavi, their votes would be nullified because within an hour or two that mark would disappear, and therefore it wouldn't matter. So just something like that, a rumor which is fed by text messages, meant that almost every single voter that I saw on voting day was carrying their own pen.
Election Day, June 12th. Both sides turned out in force, even those who'd stayed away before.
I took my ID card with full enthusiasm and went and voted. By the evening, when I found out one of my friends hadn't voted, I took her to the ballot box myself and made her vote.
But government interference at the polls discouraged opposition voters. Neda's sister told us Neda was among them.
Neda went to a couple of polling stations and was told that neither Mousavi or Karoubi's representative were present. She tried to vote, but wasn't able to.
Opposition supporters said they couldn't trust the officials manning the polling stations. More alarming were the government paramilitaries, called Basijis, who now had been mobilized. Late afternoon of Election Day, the Basiji militia struck, entering Mousavi headquarters. An eyewitness filmed on a camera phone as police tried to remove the Basiji, but they announced they had orders to shut down the office. Then, a few hours later, another blow to the opposition. State media's surprisingly early announcement of a winner.
The first reports, in fact, came from Fars News, which put up an initial story saying what the actual results were. And it was well ahead of its time. Obviously, it had been prepared in advance, and it wasn't long before it disappeared. So we had this initial statement that Ahmadinejad was doing very, very well.
But across Tehran, the opposition was projecting its own victory.
ما به هر حال خود را پیروز قطعی این میدان می‌دانیم بر اساس قرائنی که در دست داریم.
In the confusion, focus fell on the Interior Ministry, where the votes were supposed to be counted.
It was probably around 10 o'clock, and still some of the polling stations were not yet closed, but we were surprised to see that right there where the Ministry of Interior building is, which is of course where they were going to do all the voting and the tabulations for this election, they sealed it off with concrete. There were 3 layers of police cars that were also lined up, and then riot police had been marshaled behind that.
What went on inside the Interior Ministry that night, and whether the votes were fully counted, remains unclear. But outside, for supporters of President Ahmadinejad, the election seemed to be over. The next morning, the official results were broadcast to the world.
The Iranian Interior Minister said the election procedures are very clear and the government abided by law in all voting stages.
Somehow that day felt like the end of everything. And the worst feeling was that I had unwittingly helped them gain that legitimacy.
محمود احمدی نژاد 24,527,516.
Much was made of Ahmadinejad's margin of victory.
Ahmadinejad broke the 1997 record of former President Mohammad Khatami, who got
63%, was exactly the figure leaked the previous night, before the polls had closed.
Meanwhile, Hossein Mousavi has strongly protested the vote, calling it a charade.
One reporter from Press TV, Iran's state English-language station, was shocked at her channel's reports.
So my colleague calls, and he said, like, why aren't you at work? And I just said, I'm not coming to work. And he said, oh, wow, well, maybe you can come tomorrow. Maybe we can get someone else to do the show today. I'm like, no, I'm really not coming to work anymore because I'm not happy with the coverage of this network. I cannot do this.
Faranak quit state TV in protest and took to the streets.
The crowd was getting bigger and bigger. People from the shops, they just shut down their stores, joined the crowd. And there were people on the buildings going like this behind the windows and stuff, and they would come down, and they were like all these old ladies. We were crying. They were like, "Yeah, go, go, girl."